Unit 15, Part 2. Let's continue with our preliminary statement of the 4 quantify rules. That's the title of Klenk's Section 1. We talked a bit about universal instantiation. Right? If everything is F, you're entitled to infer that Andrew is F, right? Fa, or Billy is F, Fb, right? Or, and however complex the propositional function is, you can infer that if that propositional function is in fact true of all things, which is what a universal statement tells you, and the rule of UI has its premise in the form of a universal statement. If the propositional function is true of all things, as a universal statement tells you, you're entitled to infer that it's true of whichever individual you want. Andrew is A, Billy, B, Clarence, C, whatever you want, no matter how complex the propositional function is. What kind of rule is existential instantiation, and what does it allow you to infer? Okay, you should be able to derive what existential instantiation more or less allows you to infer just from the name. Existential instantiation. Existential, it has 2 words in it, existential and instantiation. It has the word existential in it, so you know that the existential quantifier is involved as either the premise or the conclusion. These are all one premise rules. One premise and, of course, one conclusion. Is the premise or is the conclusion the existential statement? Well, it's the instantiation rule, second word. So you're instantiating, so you're going from the quantified formula. Which one? Existential instantiation. You're going from the existential quantified formula. So that tells you already what this rule, more or less, allows you to infer. It is a rule which says if you are given that there exists some x such that x is f, you are entitled to infer that A is f. Are you? Always? Let's hold on to that thought for a minute and continue with our preliminary explanation of the rules. But if you think, really, is that a valid rule? That's a good thought to have. And we'll be talking a lot about the answer. Existential generalization, right? Once again, you should be able to derive what the rule allows you to do, just given the name of the rule. Existential generalization. Generalizing, very simple, right? You know what instantiating is? It's going from the quantified statement to an instance. You're inferring that it's true, that what you've been told is true of, say, everyone, is true of this instance, this individual as well. Generalization is the opposite of instantiation, right? To generalize is to say that what's true of some individual, say, is more generally true. Now there's existential generalization and universal generalization. What is existential generalization? The generalization is moving to the existential statement, right? So generalization, for our purposes, in our context, is moving to the quantified statement. If it's existential generalization, it's moving to the existential statement, right? So what does the rule allow you to do? It allows you to infer that if you are given that Andrew is F, right, that's how you read Fa. Why? Because what is A? It's an individual constant, refers to some individual. A is an individual constant, refers to some individual. So this is a singular statement. So is this, so is this. These are singular statements, right? There's no quantifiers and there's no variables there. Right? Those are singular statements. You're going from the singular statement that Andrew is F to there exists an x such that x is f. Again, ask yourself, is that a valid rule? Is that going to always be true? We'll come back to that. How about this one? Some alarms should go off when I tell you what this rule basically allows you to do. But once again, you should be able to derive what it allows you to do just given the name of the rule. Universal generalization, right? So stop and think about what it should allow you to do given the way we've been deriving what the rule allows you to do from the name, and then think, ask yourself, really, that's the rule? Is that what it allows you to do? Okay, what is it? It allows you to infer, and yes, the rule does allow you to infer this, more or less, under certain conditions. The rule says that if Andrew is F, you're entitled to infer that everything is F. What? Yes, that's what the rule allows you to do. The rule will allow you to infer from this propositional function is true of this particular instance to this propositional function is true of all things. Yes, that's what it allows you to do under certain very strict conditions coming up, right? If A is F, then everything is F. That's the rule. Right? The rule is just derived from the name universal instantiation. It's the opposite, universal generalization. Generalization is the opposite of instantiation. You're going from an instance to the quantified formula. That's what generalization is. That's what the G is. You're going from the instance to which quantified formula. That's what the U tells you. Universal generalization is to the universal statement. Okay? So that's what the rules are, more or less. Okay, so that's the point of that is that, you know, when you close the book, close the videos, and try and think what you understand, right, make sure you can derive what each rule says in its basic preliminary statement of what each rule allows you to do. Make sure you can derive what each rule says you can do from the name of the rule. Should be easy. It says in the rule. Okay. From those statements of what the rule allows you to do, you should be able to see that there are two rules which are easy. Sorry, you should be able to arrive at this thought. Two of these rules are such that in stating them, in deriving what those rules are from their names, you should have the thought, yes, that sounds like a perfectly reasonable rule. It will always be true or valid. I can't imagine any cases where, in using this rule, I'm going from something true to something which is not true, right? Which is what we've got to avoid. We're doing logic. Every rule must be truth-preserving, right? We want to be validly inferring. We want to be moving from things that we know to be true to things which we can be certain are also true. It's logic, right? It's inference. That's validity, the whole major master concept of the course. Okay, so two of these rules, you should have that thought. They're always going to be valid. No restrictions upon them will be necessary. What rules will these be? What did universal generalization say? Universal generalization said that if you are given that this propositional function is true of all things, you can infer that it's true of Andrew, or Billy, or Clarence, A or B or C, or whoever you want. Yeah, definitely always valid, right? There's no restrictions needed on that. That's the most obvious. This rule is the most obvious one where you're never going to go wrong in using it. So no restrictions on this rule are needed, right? So the preliminary presentation of this rule is the whole presentation of the rule, right? And when you use this rule, it's just whenever you're given a universal statement, you're allowed to infer on another line or on the next line, do the instantiation, which is deleting the quantifier, replacing all the instances of the variable that's bound by the quantifier with the same individual constant, your choice. Usually you'll just pick A, but it might be B, it might be C. Given any universal statement, you're allowed to infer that propositional function is the propositional function involved in the universal statement, that propositional function is true of some individual, say Andrew. You're always allowed to make that move. Universal instantiation is an unrestricted rule. What did existential instantiation say we were allowed to do? Again, derive it from the name, existential instantiation, right? You are given that there exists some x which is f. Something is f, and I'm inferring of the particular individual Andrew that he is f. Could I possibly go wrong with the use of this rule? Hell yeah, right? If I say, somebody trampled my strawberry patch, and that's true, because I can see my strawberry patch, and my strawberries have been trampled. And then I infer that you, whatever your letter is, A or B or C or whatever, you have trampled my strawberry patch. Would you object to my inference? You should, right? Just because I'm given it as true, that this propositional function is true of some one individual, that's what the existential statement says. There exists at least one x, such that x is f. I'm inferring of the particular individual that A is f, let U be A. A equals U. I'm saying that you're f. What? No, it's not always going to be a valid inference, right? So the preliminary presentation of the rule does hold, okay? It is EI, the rule of existential instantiation, that is what it allows you to do, but we are going to have to restrict the use of the rule so that we do not make false inferences, okay? This is going to be, so this is going to be a hard rule. The ones that don't require restrictions, there are two rules that don't require any restrictions, and I'm going to call them easy rules. We know we thought through what universal instantiation is, and we could determine straight away that it is an easy rule, no restrictions are necessary. When we think about what existential instantiation is, we realize that that's a hard rule. It's not, it is possible in using this rule to make false inferences, so we're going to have to restrict its use. So the preliminary explanation of what the rule allows you to do is not complete. We're going to have to restrict its use, basically, right? Restrictions necessary. Restrictions necessary. Those restrictions will be the flagging rules. There will be three. This will be a flagging rule, and there will be three rules governing the use of flag letters. We'll get to that in a bit. Okay, there are going to be, we've got an easy rule and a hard rule. There are going to be, in the end, two easy rules, two hard rules. The two easy rules, one of them is going to be an instantiation rule, one of them is going to be a generalization rule. The two hard rules, one's going to be an instantiation, one's going to be a generalization. You can sort of see that already. We've got existential instantiation is hard, universal instantiation is easy. So, right, what does existential generalization allow you to do? Again, think through what the rule says, right? Just derive it from its name. Think what it allows you to do, and we'll determine whether it's easy or hard. So we'll start this in part 3.